Tonight, FBI and DEA capture governor's network in Massachusetts, 220 weapons arsenals, military operations.
Federal agents executed the largest coordinated takedown of political cartel infiltration ever documented on United States soil. In a single night, they seized $220 million in cash and narcotics, recovered a weapons arsenal containing over 15,000 unregistered firearms, and arrested the sitting governor of Massachusetts along with 73 officials spanning state police, border agencies, and the judicial system. What they discovered was not simple corruption. This was command-level collusion. This was engineered treason dressed in a suit and a tie. This is the story of Operation Crimson Ledger. The investigation began not with a wiretap or a confidential informant. It began with silence. Silence in the wrong places. Silence when drug seizures should have been made. Silence when cartel shipments moved through Boston Harbor without triggering a single alert. The DEA noticed it first, then the FBI, then the US Navy. Someone at the top was protecting someone at the bottom. At 2 a.m., Revere, Massachusetts. The pre-dawn air hung thick and cold over the abandoned shipping terminal on the waterfront. Fog rolled in from the Atlantic, erasing the line between water and sky. The only sound was the distant hum of Interstate 93 and the idle tick of cooling metal from cargo containers that had been sitting untouched for days. Days that the manifest said should have been empty. They were not empty. At 4:47 a.m. exactly, the silence broke. 12 black FBI SUVs materialized from the fog like phantoms. Behind them came 3 DEA tactical vans and 2 IC enforcement vehicles. SWAT teams in full tactical gear descended from the roof of an adjacent warehouse. 3 Black Hawk helicopters swept overhead, their searchlights cutting through the gray like surgical blades. The coordination was perfect. Military precision, not a wasted movement. The breach team hit the main warehouse door at 4:48 a.m. Flashbangs detonated inside. The sound echoed across the empty terminal like thunder. Agents in black tactical gear moved through the warehouse like a dark wave, weapons raised, calling out clear sectors as they swept rooms. Inside, they found 43 cartel operatives. Some tried to run. Most froze. A handful opened fire. Return gunfire was immediate and overwhelming. 3 cartel members were hit. They went down hard. The rest surrendered within 90 seconds. In the northern corner of the warehouse, buried beneath pallets of what appeared to be fishing equipment, they discovered 17 refrigerated shipping containers stacked horizontally. Inside those containers were 6 tons of cocaine, 4 tons of heroin, and nearly 48 million fentanyl pills. The fentanyl pills alone represented enough narcotics to kill every person in New England 3 times over. The street value was north of $180 million. But it was not the drugs that made this operation go red. In a sealed steel office at the back of the warehouse, agents found 3 things. The first was a ledger. The second was a laptop computer encrypted with military-grade security protocols. The third was a series of photographs. The photographs showed high-level Massachusetts state officials, including the sitting governor, Marcus Holloway, meeting with known cartel operatives in private locations, country clubs, airport hangars, a lakeside cabin in New Hampshire.
ICE agent opened fire after a confrontation involving a vehicle.
Their spotlights slicing across the darkness.
Handwritten transactions, dates,
To have revealed the real threat that this officer was facing.
And federal convoys swarmed them.
police officers, border enforcement agents, federal judges.
While the incident immediately sparked public scrutiny and protest.
Massive industrial warehouse outside Lorette.
$50,000 per month for senior officials.
He fired in self-defense.
Process. But the federal agents already knew one thing with
All these cases, these serious crimes involving children, when those entrusted with protecting the law become accomplices to crime.
This was no longer a drug bust. This was a national security operation. The information was transmitted directly to FBI headquarters in Washington, D.C., and to the U.S. Attorney General's office. At 5:23 a.m., the directive
These
came down to the
intolerable
highest
acts of abuse that they have allowed to slip is rarely an isolated individual act.
What happened next would become enforcement operations of the year.
Network, multi-state raids, and corruption reaching all the way into city government to this scene. While the entire city was sound asleep,
Authorities had seized 3.4 tons of
processed in the FBI's cyber forensics lab in Boston. The team working the laptops included 2
gradually becoming the norm and justified with practical excuses. Investigation that would
military grade, probably purchased through a dark web broker with access to state-level security protocols. It took them 47 minutes to crack the outer layer. The laptop contained a master operations file labeled Project Fortification. Inside that file was a complete digital architecture of the cartel's New England empire. Not just drug routes, not just supply chains, This was a blueprint for transforming an entire state into a permanent cartel headquarters. A fortress disguised as a democracy. A network of shell companies, over 200 of them, all registered to different addresses, different business names, different corporate structures. But they all traced back to the same source. A holding company registered in Delaware called Crescent Holdings, LLC. Crescent Holdings controlled everything from restaurants in downtown Boston to logistics firms running trucks through Connecticut, from import-export businesses in Providence to a chain of laundromats and massage establishments across the region. The money flow was hypnotic in its complexity. Drug proceeds from cartel sales would enter the system through cash-intensive businesses. The massage establishments alone generated over $12 million per month in cash revenue, most of it cartel narcotics money. That cash would be moved through the restaurants, sometimes in the form of supplier payments for food and goods that never existed. From there, it would flow through the logistics companies as freight fees for shipments that never happened. By the time the money reached the offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands, Grand Cayman, and Malta, it had been sanitized through 5 layers of shell entities. From the Cayman Islands, the money would return to the United States as investment capital from a fake international venture capital fund. That capital would then be invested in real estate development projects, cryptocurrency exchanges, and green energy grants. The green energy grants alone accounted for over $63 million that had been funneled directly into accounts controlled by Massachusetts state officials. The cartel had not just infiltrated the state. They had engineered a financial infrastructure that made them indistinguishable from legitimate business. But there was something worse in the files. There was a communication log, encrypted messages between cartel leadership and the state's highest officials. Messages that showed not just corruption, but active cooperation in cartel operations. Messages in which Governor Marcus Holloway had personally authorized the timing of drug shipments. Messages in which he had ordered state police to clear specific highway corridors on specific dates. Messages in which he had instructed federal judges to reduce sentences for cartel members or to dismiss charges altogether. One message read, "The Northern Corridor remains compromised. Shut down the way stations on Route 89 for maintenance on the 22nd. Movement is scheduled for 3 to 6 o'clock. Coordinate with the lieutenant. The delivery is critical to Phase 2. The movement he was referring to was a cartel drug convoy. The delivery was 8 tons of Mexican fentanyl destined for distribution networks across New York and Vermont. The lieutenant he referenced was Lieutenant Colonel James First, commander of the Massachusetts Highway Patrol's Northern District. This was not corruption. This was a parallel system of government. A second police force, answering not to the people of Massachusetts, but to a Mexican drug cartel operating out of Sinaloa State. Every badge worn by a compromised officer was a badge that protected cartel interests instead of citizens. Every corrupt judge was a gate through which cartel operatives walked free. Every highway patrol shutdown was a green light for narcotics worth millions to reach addiction networks that would destroy thousands of lives. The analysts pulled the geographic data and overlaid it with known seizures and cartel operations from the past 18 months. The pattern was unmistakable. Whenever the FBI or DEA had made seizures in Massachusetts, those seizures were always of mid-level distributors or street-level dealers. The cartel's major shipments had never been touched. 47 major cartel movements had occurred in Massachusetts in the past 18 months. 47. Not a single one had been interdicted at the state level. By 7:42 a.m., the FBI had cross-referenced the communication logs with internal Massachusetts state police records. They identified 17 officers on cartel payroll, 4 judges, 11 state legislators, 3 members of the Massachusetts State Police Detective Unit, and 1 sitting governor who had positioned himself as the architect and the guarantor of the entire operation. The lead analyst turned to the senior FBI supervisor and said one sentence: "This is not infiltration. This is invasion." At 9:15 a.m., the FBI's Boston field office held a secure video conference with the U.S. Attorney General, the DEA Administrator, the Homeland Security Secretary, and the Director of National Intelligence. The briefing lasted 14 minutes. The decision was made in 5. Operation Crimson Ledger would go kinetic across the entire state of Massachusetts. Simultaneously, all targets would be hit within a 90-minute window to prevent communications and coordinated escape. Federal forces would comprise over 1,100 agents from the FBI, DEA, IC, and DHS, 30 SWAT teams, 12 Black Hawk helicopters, naval support from the U.S. Navy's Boston Harbor Fleet, F-15 fighter jets from Otis Air National Guard Base would maintain airspace over all major targets as a deterrent against armed resistance. This was a military campaign on U.S. soil. At 10:47 a.m., the operation
believed that a single gunshot could bring down an entire underground empire that had
The kingpin in Mexico now faced a 15-defendant federal indictment. Wiretaps, undercover operations, extensive surveillance, and swift enforcement action led to enormous seizures in this case.
The accounts contained $68 million.
Distant for a full decade, right in
He simply smiled and said, "You're too late. Phase 2 is already in
the heart of America.
Second wave of raids
DEA
hit 34
officials say they seized
simultaneous
733
locations
pounds
across
worth of the street
In
drug.
Worcester,
They
an
claim
FBI
this is the
tactical team
single
reached a
largest
converted
meth bust
warehouse
in
that
state
served as a
history.
cartel
The DEA says
superlaboratory.
agents
Inside,
seized these drugs
they
from a
found
Lakewood
equipment
home
capable
along
of
with other
processing 70
equipment to make
kilograms of
more
refined
meth.
cocaine per
This all
day.
comes as
The
part
lab
of a
was
larger
staffed by 7
investigation.
cartel chemists.
Instead,
No resistance was offered. Agents seized the equipment and 700 kilograms of
The story with a
processed
warning
cocaine
bell
ready for
from Fox
distribution.
News that
In
from nose
Springfield,
of the
an IC
authorities.
enforcement team
Southern
hit a
Texas
compound that served as the
shattered
nerve
long
center for
before
cartel
sunrise.
human trafficking
Created
operations.
in the middle of the night.
compound was
Of a
fortress.
37-year-old
18
woman.
all double
Unmarked
reinforced doors,
SUVs,
all
armored
windows
vehicle.
barricaded.
And do you think
Inside,
silence
they
protects
found
the
43
vulnerable?
victims of human trafficking, mostly women and girls from Central America being held for debt servitude. They found documentation showing that over 1,000 people per month had been processed through this facility over the past 2 years. The cartel had been generating over $9 million per month from human trafficking alone. In Fall River, a DEA tactical team hit a money laundering operation centered around a restaurant supply company. Agents found $42 million in cash stacked in industrial freezers. The cash was being sorted by 2 employees when the team breached. The employees surrendered immediately. They were young, maybe 20 years old. Both claimed they had no idea what they were handling. Agents believed them. In Lowell, Federal Border Patrol agents hit a cartel-operated smuggling house where groups of migrants were being held before being transported across state lines. 67 migrants were found, 18 of them children. The migrants had paid between $5,000 and $12,000 each to cartel coyotes for a promise of safe passage to Boston. Most of them had been sexually abused during transit. Some had been forced to carry drug packages. All of them were traumatized. In New Bedford, an FBI team raided a warehouse containing the cartel's weapons arsenal. The arsenal included over 15,000 unregistered firearms, 397 automatic weapons that had been illegally converted from semi-automatic originals, and 214 hand grenades. The weapons cache was valued at approximately $4 million. The arsenal appeared to be designed for a multi-front armed conflict. Agent notes from the scene read, "This was not a drug distribution center. This was a military staging ground." By 12:34 p.m., all 34 primary raid targets had been breached. All targets had been secured. No federal agents had been killed. 2 cartel members had been killed in armed confrontations. 47 cartel operatives had been wounded. Over 400 cartel members, corrupt state officials, and money launderers had been arrested. The quantities seized were staggering: 23 tons of cocaine, 11 tons of heroin,
first-term Ohio State
137
senator,
million fentanyl pills,
again and
$48
again,
million in
until it
cash
was no
discovered
longer
in the
possible
first
to
wave.
ignore.
34
Dismantled a
million more
multi-state
discovered
trafficking
during
ring
secondary
and
searches.
taken
Over 9,000
142 suspects
kilograms of
into custody.
methamphetamine.
Only when there is no
37
longer
tons of
room for
narcotics
costly
seized
side.
in the morning.
Invoice
The
connected
total
to
street
North Star
value of
Community
drugs
Health
seized exceeded
quietly broke the
$220
pattern.
million.
The sealed
When the
loading
final
docks
report
and
was
steel
compiled,
gates of
the
the weapon.
mathematics of destruction was clear.
Those
In
inside
6
were
hours,
forced to the
federal
ground,
forces had
hands kept
dismantled the largest
visible.
drug
We're still
empire ever
tracing
documented
Medicaid
in New
payments
England.
and nonprofit
The cartel's
links. The
entire
numbers told a
Massachusetts
completely
infrastructure,
different
built
story.
over
For
5
the first time in
had been
many
erased.
years,
But
the
discovery
system
of what
started
they meant
cleansing
would make it
itself
clear
from the
that what they
inside
had
out.
stopped was only the
Helicopters
beginning. Over the
disappeared
next
from the
72
night
hours,
sky.
Federal
Security
investigators worked
investigations
continuously
and the
through the seized
DEA.
digital files,
What remained
paper
was
records, and
accountability.
interrogation transcripts.
Slowly,
What they
methodically,
discovered was
and
that the
without
cartel's
mercy.
infiltration of Massachusetts
same
law
category
enforcement
used
was far
for
deeper than
industrial
initially
substances.
understood.
Cartel distribution
Inside the
hub.
Massachusetts
Faded
State Police
first.
Department,
Alarm
investigators
sirens
found
became
that
less
42
frequent.
officers
Legal
across multiple
correspondence
districts were on cartel
and
payroll.
encrypted storage
These were not
drives.
desk officers.
Before
These were
locating a-
active patrol
What started
and
as an
investigation
immigration
officers.
sweep
Officers with
safe
access to
hidden behind
dispatch
interior
systems,
panel.
traffic
The
monitoring,
second team
surveillance
entered
equipment,
North Star
and
Community Health
interagency
in a
communications.
low-income neighborhood.
One captain had personally
In that moment,
provided
the
cartel
agents
operatives
realized
with
the
home
city was
addresses
facing
of
a
3
major
DEA
criminal because the
informants.
distribution
2 of those
networks
informants
themselves
been
had
executed.
collapsed.
The
The
third had fled the
Store and
country.
transport
In the
a massive
Massachusetts state
logistical
court system,
center.
7 judges
Pause
had
and
been
reflect
compromised.
right now and
These
ask
judges
yourself
had
whether
collectively
this
dismissed charges against 134 cartel associates over an 18-month period. Charges including drug trafficking, attempted murder, money laundering, and human trafficking. One judge, Judge Patricia Mendez, had personally reduced the sentences of 15 cartel members by a combined total of 473 years. She had explained the lenient sentences as rehabilitation-focused sentencing in published opinions. The actual truth was that each sentencing reduction corresponded to a cartel payment of between $75,000 and $200,000 to her offshore accounts. In the Massachusetts state legislature, 11 representatives and senators had received cartel payments totaling over $8 million. These payments had been disguised as donations to their campaign committees or consulting fees to family members. In exchange, these legislators had blocked a bill that would have increased funding for drug enforcement agencies by $15 million, introduced legislation that would have reduced mandatory sentences for trafficking offenses, ensured that oversight committees designed to investigate state police corruption had their budgets reduced to skeleton levels, delayed federal requests for interagency cooperation on cartel investigations by inserting bureaucratic obstacles into the state legislative process. One state senator, Senator William Garrett, had personally introduced a bill that would have exempted certain agricultural and logistics businesses from routine DEA inspections. The bill had been designed specifically to protect the cartel's restaurant supply companies and agricultural transportation operations. The bill had passed the state legislature in its initial form and only failed at the governor's veto stage, a veto that was later revealed to have been ordered by the U.S. Attorney General after the federal government had discovered the scheme. The emotional toll on the honest officers and officials who discovered the scale of the betrayal was immense. A state police sergeant named Michael Chun, who had spent 18 years building cases against drug traffickers, wept when he learned that a superior officer he had respected for a decade, Lieutenant Colonel James First, had systematically dismantled his investigations. First had leaked information about ongoing operations to cartel contacts. Chun had lost a partner in 2023 to what had been officially ruled a car accident but was now being investigated as a possible cartel assassination. The partner's name was Officer David Rodriguez. A federal judge assigned to oversee the Massachusetts corruption investigation, Judge Sarah Whitmore, stated in a court filing, "The badge and the bench have been weaponized against the citizens they were sworn to protect. We are not looking at corruption. We are looking at a hostile occupation of government infrastructure by organized crime." The depth of this occupation became clear when investigators analyzed communication patterns. The cartel had established a secure communications network using encrypted applications that ran parallel to official state police and court systems. Cartel operatives communicated with their law enforcement contacts through this parallel network. When a raid was planned, the information flowed through this network within minutes. When a judge needed to be instructed to reduce a sentence, an encrypted message was sent. When a shipment needed highway access, the parallel network made the arrangements. It was as if the cartel had built a second government inside Massachusetts. A government with different laws. A government that answered to a different master. Federal authorities had arrested 83 state and federal officials from Massachusetts on corruption and conspiracy charges related to cartel operations. Among those arrested were Governor Marcus Holloway, charged with racketeering, conspiracy to distribute narcotics, and money laundering. Sentence recommendation, 70 years. Lieutenant Colonel James First, charged with conspiracy, obstruction of justice, and bribery. Sentence recommendation, 45 years. Judge Patricia Mendez, charged with corruption and bribery. Sentence recommendation, 30 years. Senator William Garrett, charged with corruption and bribery. Sentence recommendation, 25 years. The remaining 79 individuals faced sentences ranging from 3 to 20 years depending on their level of involvement in cartel operations. But even as federal authorities were processing the Massachusetts arrests and seizures, investigation into the seized digital files revealed something that would prove far more alarming than the Massachusetts operation itself. The cartel's control of Massachusetts had never been designed as an endpoint. It had been designed as a foundation, a base of operations for a larger continental expansion. Analysis of Project Fortification revealed that the cartel had implemented similar infiltration strategies in Connecticut, Vermont, New Hampshire, Rhode Island, and New York. The pattern was identical. Corrupt state officials who could be leveraged through financial incentives or blackmail. Law enforcement officers placed on cartel payroll. Judges positioned to provide legal protection. Shell companies designed to launder money through state-licensed businesses. In Connecticut alone, investigators found evidence of cartel influence over at least 22 state officials across multiple agencies. In New York, the numbers were higher. A preliminary scan of encrypted files recovered in the Massachusetts raid suggested that the cartel had active relationships with over 90 state and local officials across 5 northeastern states. The scale of this discovery triggered an immediate expansion of federal operations. Operation Crimson Ledger had been expanded to include coordinated federal task forces across 6 northeastern states. FBI field offices from Boston, New Haven, and New York were coordinating with DEA regional commands to conduct follow-up investigations. What had begun as a single-state corruption case had become a multi-state organized crime investigation of unprecedented scope. The cartel's plan, as revealed through interrogations and seized communications, had included establishing a northern corridor that would control drug distribution from the Mexican border through New England and into Canada. The corridor would handle the transportation and distribution of narcotics that could not be moved through traditional southern routes because of intensified
I believe
federal
that this
border
hotel
enforcement
raid
in
exposed
Arizona,
far
New
more
Mexico,
than just
and
immigration
Texas. The
violations.
Massachusetts
Undercover
operation had been
buys,
designed as the
digital
hub of this
tracing,
northern
and
corridor.
multi-agency
All heroin,
intelligence
fentanyl,
gathering.
cocaine
And
destined
criminals.
for distribution in
However,
New
the
England
human
and Canada
cost was
flowed through the
staggering.
Massachusetts
Desks were
network.
neatly
The
arranged,
corrupt
but
state
untouched.
officials were not just
Printers
taking
were
bribes.
warm,
They were
despite
providing
Tens of
infrastructure,
thousands of lives
transportation
destroyed and
authorization,
thousands of families
legal
shattered.
protection,
No
judicial
employees present.
interference.
And
Everything a
filing
drug
systems
cartel
contained
needed to
thousands
move
of
product
intake forms that
undetected
differed.
through a major
The
American
phone
region.
seized from
One
the
seized
rooms
document
kept vibrating
outlined the cartel's
nonstop.
five-year
Scandal
expansion
involving
plan.
Khalif and
The cartel
Hodon
intended to control
viewed
the
Entered a
drug
small
distribution
apartment
networks of
registered
12
as a
states.
skills
The
training
plan
classroom.
suggested they would have influence
And
over national
officials,
policy
the cartel
through a
had
network
been
of
using the
compromised officials
facility
at the state
with
and
a
federal
spotless
level.
public
That
service
document
record.
read like a declaration of war against American democracy. It was not subtle. It was not hidden. It was a detailed blueprint for how a foreign criminal organization intended to capture the government of multiple American states through a combination of financial corruption, blackmail, and the systematic replacement of honest officials with cartel operatives. The document concluded with a single line: by 2035, the system serves us, not them. The political reverberations of Operation Crimson Ledger transformed American law enforcement policy overnight. Within 48 hours of Governor Holloway's arrest, the Massachusetts State Police Department initiated what they called the Purge. Over 200 officers were placed on immediate administrative suspension pending background reviews and polygraph examinations. 17 of those officers resigned before their hearings. 34 were terminated. The remaining officers were reinstated, but not before undergoing retraining in ethics and constitutional law enforcement. The Massachusetts State Judiciary created an emergency oversight committee tasked with reviewing every sentence reduction and case dismissal issued by the 7 compromised judges over the past 3 years. Approximately 412 cases were identified as potentially compromised. Those cases are now being reopened, and some cartel members have been rearrested and are facing extended sentences. At the federal level, Attorney General Catherine Morrison announced that Operation Crimson Ledger would serve as a model for a new FBI task force called the Internal Corruption and Infiltration Division. This division would focus specifically on identifying and dismantling cartel infiltration of government at all levels: state, local, and federal. The human cost was tallied in the weeks following the operation. The DEA released preliminary statistics showing that the narcotics seized during Operation Crimson Ledger, particularly the fentanyl pills, would have resulted in an estimated 47,000 additional overdose deaths had they reached street distribution networks. The cartel's operation in Massachusetts had represented a direct threat to nearly 50,000 lives across the northeastern United States. The human trafficking victims discovered during the raids represented only a fraction of those processed through the cartel's network. Investigators estimated that the cartel had trafficked at least 12,000 people through Massachusetts over a 5-year period. Many of those individuals had been subjected to physical abuse, sexual assault, and forced labor. The psychological impact on these survivors would require years of specialized trauma counseling. Federal prosecutors estimated that Governor Holloway and his network had generated over $320 million in revenue over 5 years. This money had funded cartel expansion across the continent. It had funded criminal enterprises. It had funded the corruption of officials in neighboring states. It had funded the purchase of military-grade weapons and the recruitment of additional cartel operatives. The Massachusetts operation revealed that the boundary between criminal organization and government could be made invisible. That organized crime did not always announce itself with violence and street-level drug dealing. Sometimes organized crime wore a suit and sat in a governor's mansion. Sometimes it issued court orders and passed state legislation. Sometimes it wore a police badge and drove a patrol car. The discovery triggered a national conversation about the vulnerability of democratic institutions to organized crime infiltration. Academics, security experts, and law enforcement officials debated whether American government, designed for an era of face-to-face accountability, could withstand infiltration by organizations willing to corrupt officials at every level. The answer that emerged from federal investigations was sobering. American institutions were vulnerable, more vulnerable than previously understood. The cartel's Massachusetts operation had nearly succeeded because nobody had been looking for a threat that large at that level. The assumption had been that organized crime operated in the shadows, not in the halls of government. The assumption had been wrong. The initial phase in Massachusetts has been stabilized. The immediate criminal network has been dismantled. 83 officials face prosecution. Over $200 million in seizures have been converted to federal evidence. The weapons arsenal has been cataloged and secured. The human trafficking victims have been connected with victim services. But the larger picture remains uncertain. Federal investigators continue to process encrypted files recovered from Governor Holloway's residence, from the cartel's money laundering operations, and from a server farm discovered in a New Bedford warehouse. Those files are expected to reveal connections to cartel operations in Connecticut, New York, and Vermont. The expansion of federal operations into those states is expected to begin within weeks. The question that haunts federal leadership is simple but profound. How many other states harbor similar infiltration networks? How many other governors, state police commanders, federal judges, and legislators are currently on cartel payroll? How close did the cartel come to achieving their 5-year expansion plan? The answers to those questions will likely emerge over the coming months and years. Operation Crimson Ledger, which began as a single-state investigation, is now understood as the first major confrontation between American law enforcement and a new form of organized crime threat: the systematic capture of state government by foreign criminal organizations. Governor Marcus Holloway remains in federal custody. He has not cooperated with investigators. When asked about his relationship with the cartel, he has responded with a single statement: power does not require violence. Power only requires the willingness to compromise once. After that first compromise, the rest becomes inevitable. I learned that lesson very well. His statement captures something essential about the Massachusetts case. The cartel did not conquer Massachusetts through force. They conquered it through corruption. They exploited the ambition of officials willing to rationalize betrayal. They exploited the fear of officials who realized they had already crossed a line. They exploited the silence of honest officials who were afraid to speak. The cities and communities affected by the cartel's Massachusetts operation will spend years recovering. The neighborhoods where cartel-controlled fentanyl was distributed lost hundreds of people to overdose deaths. Families were shattered. Children grew up without parents. Communities were hollowed out. This is what Operation Crimson Ledger discovered: that the war against organized crime is not fought in distant countries or on foreign borders. It is fought in state houses and courtrooms and police departments. It is fought in the hearts of officials who must choose between ambition and integrity. It is fought every day by honest law enforcement officers who refuse to accept the corrupted system built around them. If you are still watching, understand this: the story of Operation Crimson Ledger is not concluded. The investigation continues. More arrests are coming. More corruption will be exposed. The system that was infiltrated will be rebuilt. That rebuilding will be painful. It will require firing trusted officials. It will require re-examining cases and re-prosecuting criminals. It will require citizens to accept that their government was compromised in ways they never imagined. But it will also offer a path forward. A reminder that institutions can be corrupted but also reformed. That organized crime can be challenged and defeated. That honest people still exist within government. That the system, despite its vulnerabilities, retains the capacity to defend itself. This story is fictional. The characters are invented. The operation is dramatized. But the threat it represents is real.